We're going to focus this video on intrinsic validation. That means stepping into a world of another person and helping them feel understood. That's intrinsically valuing them. It's the single greatest gift we can give a human being. I want to go back to scroll number 8. I'll multiply my value 100-fold and read this last piece of this chapter about the wheat grain. Remember the wheat? We can be compared to a wheat grain. We can be put in a sack, fed to the swine. We can be ground into flour, made into bread, broken open and devoured by the will of others, or we can be planted in the darkness of the soil so that we can ripen. And remember, that was all our discouragement and our despairs and frustrations. He says this, "Now like the wheat grain, which will sprout and blossom only if it is nurtured with rain and sun and warm winds, I too must nurture my body and mind to fulfill my dreams. But to grow to full stature, the wheat must wait on the whims of nature." And here comes the message for all of us. If we feel like we've got this comfort zone, we're in a cocoon where we feel alone, we feel isolated, sometimes we feel discouraged, we're in this victim space, I need not wait, for I have the power to choose my own destiny. This is a choice. I hope we're ready to make it, because here we go. Now, we've decided that those things we had in our sack aren't serving us. They're creating anger and angst, and frankly, they're destroying our health at a cellular level. We're choosing to take that and ask, is anyone else suffering from a similar wound? Yes, grave it on our heart. And now we have it as a reference point to connect with another person. We might ask in the morning, if there's anyone I can serve, put them on my path, and I will serve them. I met with a great friend this morning, just based on that prayer. Is there anyone I can serve? You want to be asking that question so you have these opportunities. And even more overtly, making a phone call, doing some prospecting, etc. Now you have a person to talk to. I want to give you the guidance of how to connect with that person, the things you want to be conscious about. This isn't necessarily 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the principles at play. The very first one is to help us break out of this shell. Because in here, the dialogue is all about us and how people are thinking about us. So step number 1 is to start noticing what's important to other people. We start noticing, and most likely it won't be important to us. I've shared before some of my great experiences, like in a taxi, talking to someone who's got a giant tattoo on their arm and asking about it and finding out just how tender that ink is to that person, what it represents to their life. Do we care enough to notice? Because that's the first step of breaking us out of our shell, is to notice what's important to them and then verbalizing it. Now be cautious and aware, because you're going to sometimes feel uncomfortable doing this. Like you're trying to manipulate a situation or something like that. Just know that discomfort is really what awareness feels like when it first wakens up. We just shifted. Inside here, it's all about us. We stepped out. It's about noticing what's important to them. If it's uncomfortable, just keep doing it till you see the reaction when you notice what's important to another human being. So that's the first step of breaking us out of this shell. Now, we've noticed. Now we want to be listening. Just listening. This is a lost art. When was the last time someone cared enough about you to just listen to you until you felt understood? And then they try to fix you. I've asked that when I've spoken in front of 3,000 people and less than 10 hands were raised. I never see more than 10 with 3,000 people. This is such a rare experience. I asked a new coaching client that on Monday. Has that ever happened? He said, yeah, it did. And he went back in time to tell me. One client said, 6 years ago, I was at a convention, or a banquet it was, a banquet, and this happened. This is extremely rare to just listen because most of us are trained to listen, to respond. We also think that sharing our story, telling our part, is just part of a conversation. It's being conversational. Well, not true. A conversation doesn't require us to tell our story, but it will require us to ask questions about theirs. That's a conversation. So we begin to listen. Listening to understand, not to respond or to give advice, just to understand where that person is. Now we begin to understand, and what we want to do, if you went into my office and I open up my journal, it's just full of little keys that open a person's door to their shell, their world. They said something about a 16-year-old that was giving them challenges. I read a note. I got a new Corvette, made a note. This was happening, made a note. Then come back and we're going to start step number 3, which is creating a really safe place by diving deeper into all those little verbal hints. They're keys that open up a person's shell. You see, when you're in a shell and you're with someone you don't know, you don't just dump everything out usually. You give them little hints, just little hints, little keys. Are we hearing them? Are we collecting them? I do it on a piece of paper when I'm with someone, and they might ask, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just taking some notes. A minute ago, you said something about this. Could you tell me more about that? There's nothing wrong with taking those notes. It'll help you, and frankly, it's a compliment to the person who's talking. So you're taking notes, little keys. Now, if you've got a quick enough mind and you can remember them all, power to you, not to me. But I write them down. I'm listening. I'm beginning to see a picture. I'm starting to understand. Now I'm going to ask them questions to go deeper into each one of those pieces. Tell me a little bit more about this, a little bit more about that. Now, if you're saying, but Dave, this would go on for hours. In the book and in the training material, under Connection with People, we talk about the landmines. And one of them is we sit down with someone and say, tell me about your life. And an hour and a half later, they're still telling us about their life. And we haven't had a chance to say anything about what we'd like to talk about. So we talk about narrowing the context of the conversation. If you're dealing with health products, I wanted to meet with you today to talk about health and how important it is to you. Could you share with me? Same rules apply. Now I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen. We just narrowed the context. So we stay focused. It's not a game. It's just eliminating extrinsic things that really aren't germane to what we're talking about. We're listening, writing down keys. I challenge you, do this. Have fun with this. You'll be surprised. I used to do calls on Saturday morning with a large group. It was like a group session. And one of the things we did, we'd meet for an hour, and then the second hour, I would interview one of their people, a client, a friend, a family member. And I'd start stepping into their world and just listening. 2 things happened at the end of that experience. The person knew we were going to do this. We left them on the phone. We never teach anything we'd ever be ashamed to let any potential client or customer hear. Isn't that nice to know? No gimmicks, no techniques. It's about caring. I'd hear 2 things. 1, I'd have everybody that's listening write down all the keys they're hearing. Everybody. First thing I'd hear from their friend who invited them, I never knew that. They've been friends for 10 years and they didn't know that? And I discovered it in 15 or 20 minutes? How's that possible? The only difference was I listened, I wrote down the keys, and then I asked them about the keys to go deeper. That was one discovery. Second discovery was actually more profound. The people listening had written down keys I missed. This isn't about, Dave, you're really good at this. It's each one of us are uniquely prepared because of what used to be there in that muslin sack, and we've taken it, we've engraved it on our heart, and we've shown up to serve, we will hear things nobody else hears. You will hear things I will not hear. You'll see things I will not see. And you'll be prompted to ask questions I would not ask. That's the beauty of this process. Especially if you've said, if there's anyone I can serve, put them on my path and I'll serve them. Because people uniquely prepared for you will show up on your path. And there you are, uniquely prepared to serve them. So take these notes, write down these keys, and just explore them with the person. Then we shift to the third section, which is asking empathetic questions. Now, these can't be scripted. These are born out of your life experience. Now, if you're in your shell and you're worried about you and how are you sounding and they think you're an idiot or you need to get a commission and you got commission breath, whatever it might be, you're not going to be present to ask empathetic questions. But if you've taken this, which you are so sick of dragging around, it's in your heart and you now are listening, those questions will just float to the surface. Wow. Do you ever feel like you want to do this? Have you ever done that? Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that. We are now doing a very critical piece of intrinsic validation. We are not telling them our story. Oh, I've been there before, I did this, and we tell them all about us. No. We're demonstrating that we know by asking a question. And if we don't have the question, we don't yet understand. Everybody got that? If I don't have the question to ask, I don't yet understand, or there's just so much noise going on in my head, I'm not listening. But if I'm listening, and the question hasn't come to the surface, you're not in the mission of asking profound, earth-shattering questions and what would Dave say? Or, I got a brain freeze. Just be there. Trust. You've got your life experience right here. What is it telling you? Don't talk yourself out of it. Ask the question. Some of the most profound conversations I've ever had in this process, I would never ask another person, but I was prompted to ask it in that conversation, and it made all the difference. Trust your intuition and your empathy because of your life experience, which you now hold here, not over there. You now hold here. You're listening, you ask an empathetic question, and you watch this person go. I've shared before, sitting in an airport next to a person I've never met. Fully present. That stuff's in here. Who can I serve today? Could this be the one? How are you? Where are you going? No, what's happening? They'll almost always give you a little verbal hint. Oh, it's been a couple of tough weeks and what's happening? And the fact that you care enough to listen, they'll share. And I often hear, I've never told anybody this, not even my wife. And then they share something. And there's a bond. They just let me inside their shell. But to be inside their shell, I will want to get outside of my shell, so that I can take down that wall of hate and suspicion and build a bridge so that my love can enter their soul. It doesn't take long. And it could be with a total stranger, simply because you and I care enough to do this, to listen. Now, when this happens, I share this in the book and in the training material. When you think you totally understand and they feel understood, just ask one more question. Just one more. And be very conscious of how much you learn in that just one more question. Sometimes we're in a little bit of a hurry at that point. We've just invested a lot of time. We want to do the next thing. One more question. I often learn more in the last question than I've learned to that point. Now, step number 4. I've noticed, I've listened, I've asked empathetic questions, and now I'm in a new moment of decision. Totally new moment. What does that mean? This person has shared so much with me. I know a lot about them. I know a lot about their circumstances. Is this the time? Do I have something of value to share? Are they ready to hear it? Can you feel those questions? That's what you want your mind to be doing. Just, Don't talk yourself out of it. That's not the purpose. More often than not, is to stop you from throwing up on them and violating the very process you just went through. Also, is this someone that I want to invest more time in? A boundary. Key. A boundary. If not, I have given them the greatest gift you can give a person. The gift of understanding. They feel understood. I can simply say, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I wish you the very best. And they walk away better than we found them. We've given them a gift. And we've created a boundary. Nothing wrong with that. At the same time, you may have an idea and it may be time to share. And if it is, then you're going to move to step number 5, gaining agreement. It sounds like this. These are my words, but I'll just give you how they should feel. You've shared a lot with me. Just review it with them, these things. I got a couple ideas that might serve you. Would you like to hear them? More often than not, you'll hear, absolutely. Absolutely. So you take them by the arm, and metaphorically, you take them out of their world, over the bridge, into your world, and you share just the part they need to know. Now, quite often, objections will come up, and especially when you're early in the process. Because as you develop this, you'll be more and more courageous, and you'll feel inspired to ask them questions that address the very objections they would have raised later, and you're fearless in doing so, because you're there to serve them. And they can feel it, and it adds value to their life. However, if an objection comes up, just walk back into their world and ask a question. Objections aren't to be answered. They're not questions. They're statements. Statements demand an answer, demand a question. So we ask a question. Well, how long have you been experiencing that? What has it been like for you to be in that space? Tell me more about that. And by staying in their world, they often answer their own objection. Now, occasionally, just know that early in the process, you may have missed something along the way. In your desire to practice the steps, you may not have known they really weren't interested in going any deeper, and you kept pushing, and now they're just trying to get rid of you. Be aware of that. That could be happening. Okay. Let them go. Don't beat them up. It's not like, look, I just gave you 15 or 20 minutes of my time. You will listen to me. We don't want to do that. We always want to be relieving that pressure. If we're in a sales situation and we've made a presentation, and then someone is a week later having some questions or doubts, the last thing we want to say is, look, I've invested a lot of time in you. I've studied, and this is what you said you wanted. That does nothing but pull up walls and cause frustration. We step back into their world. Well, share with me what you're thinking. What happened since we talked last? Oh, tell me more about that. That's how we address objections. It's by asking questions and stepping back into their world. Lastly, you're going to find some of these people, when you step into the world, you care enough to do it. You may find a dangerous person, less than you might think, but there are occasionally dangerous people. I call them rattlesnakes. You could do business with a rattlesnake, but you have to hold them differently or you will be bitten. You put a rattlesnake in your sleeping bag, you climb in and it bites you. He bit me. That's what rattlesnakes do. They bite. Don't be looking for rattlesnakes. There's not very many of them. Not when we actually care enough to step into a person's world. Because then we discover that shell they've been presenting is filled with all kinds of overcompensation to protect their little child from getting damaged again. Well, don't be disappointed or discouraged by their shell. Get inside their world and find out what's really happening. And watch them open up and soften up and have a great conversation with them. I said lastly a minute ago, I do have one more thing. When we talk about this kind of an approach to loving a person, we sometimes have all kinds of questions like it takes too long, etc. Just go to the landmines that are in the training. Listen to the landmines. In the book, the landmines are in there, I think like page 107. Go through the landmines and go, wow, am I letting my need to get efficiency accomplished to get in the way of connection? I'm willing to drip on someone and be in damage control for 6 months, but I don't have an extra 10 minutes to connect. It's not logical. So just look at those and just see how they feel and go, wow, I don't want to rob myself of this connection because it's the fastest way to my own objectives by addressing and solving theirs. And in this process, we want to be really, really careful that we don't use this as an excuse for being firm. Sometimes we get this warm and fuzzy feeling about just listening and just connecting. This is about accuracy. This is about clarity. You are caring enough to step into their world, but you're doing so you can find out about them and leave them feeling understood. And in the process, learn what you need to know of whether or not this is a person you want to invest more time in, a person who could use what you have, if this is the time to share it with them. It's about accuracy, but it's driven by love, agape love, a heightened level of awareness. So in review, we all have one of these to some extent. Some of us have one that's thicker, and some of them are really small, and we're just really cramped inside of them. We want to break out? Do we just want our circumstances to change? Well, we'll probably stay in our shell. Do we want to change, which means we want to sprout and grow and become? Then we want to break through this, and how do we break through it? We take all those experiences, despair, discouragement, failures. We engrave them on our heart. We're planted in these. We begin serving and listening to people. At first, it's a little uncomfortable, but the shift starts by noticing what's important. That's an easy step to begin with. If you just did that for a couple weeks, you'd feel yourself being more and more comfortable getting out of your shell. And as you have experiences of people's walls coming down, their cooperation flooding out, your soul being filled with joy, your shell will begin to soften and then break. And then you can be like the wheat grain. Just feel that. It breaks out of the shell. That darkness of the soil softens that hard edge and allows it to swell until it can break out, work its way to the surface, to the sunshine. May you find that sunshine. May you find that joy by taking the steps necessary to break out of that shell, out of that cocoon, out of that comfort zone. I hope so badly that what we've shared over the last few videos will serve you and that you'll take courage. Take courage and begin this journey. And in a few months, look back and go, wow, I could have robbed myself of all of this joy by staying in that very dark and lonely place, inside that grain of wheat, as Og called it. Let's break out. Let's create the most we can with your life, because that's where the joy is.